join us, make sure in the chat box you put all panelists and attendees in the to section. What I mean by put is make sure you select all panelists and attendees. Hey, Rishma, how are you doing? Right? I hope everybody is doing great. I'm super excited about our final webinar. Regina here. You completed a long journey together. So let's get ready to wrap this up. Gina says she's also excited as well and doing great. Rashma, thank you, good to hear. So let's see how many people have joined us so far. We have a good number. So I want to make sure we stay on time, and that means let's start on time. And for everybody else, I only have 2 people that said hello. Say hello so that we know you're in the room. We have Ramiro here, but 2, thank you, everybody. We like to see that chat box going just so I know that you're there. And then when those polls come up, it lets me know you're available to also do those polls. Fantastic. Thank you, Daniel, as well. So let's go ahead and begin. What do we have for today's agenda? Okay. One, we're going to talk about negotiation as a process. We're going to highlight what exactly is negotiation efficacy and what is the meaning of building a strong negotiation relationship, and what does our childhood have to do with negotiation today as we engage in it as adults. And then we'll do a case study on who's the greatest negotiator in history. And then the last part is what's my next step and what action plan should I engage in if I want to take my negotiation skills or my journey additional steps, right? Beyond just these weeks that we've had together. And thank you everybody for participating in the chat box. Melina, Katrina, thank you very much, right? So let's begin. How does negotiation unfold, right? If we think about negotiation, there's so many different elements. You learn through the courses, and in every module, there's the distributive and there's the integrative, and then there's all these different techniques within each of those modules. You've also learned about difficult tactics that people can employ on you, and then how to really manage some of those difficult tactics. You even understand a little bit about how your personality plays a role in the negotiation and how others' personality matters as well, right? But one thing I want you to think about is negotiation can be viewed as 3 dimensions. It helps you kind of bring all those modules together into one framework that's a little bit easier to understand and to remember, and maybe to also use as a way to store information of all what you learned so far, right? So I say that negotiation is 3 dimensions. The very first dimension starts at the bottom, is the relationship. I like to say that's the foundation of negotiation. If you remember through the module, subjective value is one of the components that Professor Kern talked about. And that's what we refer to here is relationship of the negotiation. Before we even go on to the process of negotiation, that is, how do we really engage in negotiation? What are the agreements and terms of negotiation? Then we talk about the actual substance that we're negotiating. For you, based on the activities that you engaged in, that could be the car, the house, or the consulting contract, right? But if you want to think about it as a process, it helps you a little bit understand where do you start. So what I'm going to show you next is we're going to start on the left side of the screen, right? And that's what step 1 or stage 1 of the negotiation process. Okay? And the stage 1 of negotiation is very much on the relationship end. As we mentioned earlier, the relationship dimension is the foundation of negotiation. So in the very beginning, you must decide what is the appropriate type of relationship or interaction am I going to have with my counterparts? Is it necessary for me to be empathetic? Is it necessary for me to be more assertive? Or should I engage in more coercion, which is a little bit more we sometimes can be a little too intense and too strong for certain people's personality. You have to be aware of who you're negotiating with. Some people like those who are empathetic, those who can understand them, willing to listen to their needs and their values, or what is it they really want out of the negotiation. So take the time to really understand. If I am engaging in a negotiation with Diego, I'm going to take the time to really understand, how do I talk or communicate with Diego? And Diego may appreciate different types of communication styles compared to possibly maybe even Joseph, if that's the case. So if Joseph, you're negotiating with me, you may have a different way of negotiating with me versus if you're negotiating with possibly maybe Molina, if that's the case, right? So you have to take the moment to understand who you're negotiating with. That's what we mean by the relationship component, right? Then after you understand your party as who they are, their personality, if that's the case, how they communicate, then you can go on to talk about what is it that we're going to do in this negotiation. And that includes the rules, the logistics, the guidelines. What are the expectations of our negotiation process? This is where you kind of, what we call, create a safety net. A safety net is essentially that once I establish the rules and the logistics, if you choose to violate any of these rules or logistics, it lets me say, hey, remember those guidelines? Remember that agreement that we made in the very beginning of the process? Let's go and revisit that. Or that's inappropriate behavior that you're engaging right now. If you skip this stage, stage 2 of understanding the process that you're going to agree with each other, then you're going to have no room or even, let's say, some safety to go back and discuss some of these terms that your counterparts can instantly say, well, we never discussed that in the beginning. How am I held accountable for these types of behaviors or actions? Right? So what you're really doing here at stage 2 is not just about establishing expectations from both parties or establishing the rules or the logistics of the process of negotiation, but you're creating accountability. You're creating some sense of respect for what are the right behaviors that you're going to allow in this negotiation process. And it also lets your counterparty know how they should behave in order for you to agree to the terms or accept an offer, if that's the case, or sell something. Right? Then you move on to stage 3, which is, let's talk about the substance. Right? And how am I going to engage in this process with you in order to get the substance I want from you or from your counterparts? Okay? So that's when you decide, do I cooperate? Is a competitive type of substance we're trying to get, or is it better for me to manipulate that situation? Be careful with manipulation. I know people do use manipulation in real negotiation, and sometimes it can be very effective. If you notice in the very center of this diagram or picture, there's a dotted line, right? It cuts right across in half. What that dotted line means is what I call time, right? It separates the time. And the very left side of it is the early stages. These are in essence these type of negotiation relationships that are very much more short term. But once you get to the right side of that vertical line, then you're on the long-term relationship. This is where it gets a little bit more long-term relationships, where you acquire each more negotiations in later on the stages, or you continuous types of negotiation as well. Or it could be that you're engaging in maybe weeks negotiations. I can think about lawyers that engage in negotiations. Sometimes they go through these negotiation process that can take up to months before they reach a deal. But a lot of you may be in the short-term negotiations, such as buying a car, right? Sometimes short-term negotiation be going to the market and shopping, where you can actually barter if that's the case. Right? But once you get past the short-term types of negotiation and you're engaging in long-term relationships, you need to really go back to stage 2, which is the process. But you're establishing a different type of process involved in this negotiation. And this is where you go, all right, what kind of relationship engagement do we want to be part of? Or in essence, do we want to make sure consistently being implemented as we're continuing this negotiation process? Do we expect some kind of loyalty to be displayed during this negotiation process. Loyalty and trust is not a factor so much during stage 2 process, but during stage 4 process, those elements of the process becomes critical in order for you guys to reach a deal or reach an agreement. If there is no loyalty, then reaching an agreement or deal becomes very much problematic when there is a longer period in the process of negotiation. If you want to make sure that a deal gets sealed, then you have to revisit the relationship component between you and the counterpart, right? And you have to remind each other that this is not just a short-term transaction, that this is a long-term transaction, that some concessions can be given. In essence, that I'm willing to give up something if you're willing to give up something. Remember that concessions is only useful after you've already made some establishment of the process, you understand the substance before you start giving a lot of what you can offer or what you have on the table. So some of you, I remember reading in the discussions, why is it that the bird end up giving some later on and some were early in the stages of your negotiation when you were buying the house in 67 Fish Pond Lane? Giving up the bird is a concession for the seller. You want to give the bird away not too early, but toward the end if you're having difficulties of engaging in an agreement. Okay? The bird can be leveraged to maintain the value of the home or the price that you at a higher level. You do not decrease extremely on the price and give up concessions. Your concession is your leverage if you're the seller, okay? If you think it from that standpoint. So pay attention to when you start doing the concessions. I tend to advocate for concessions toward the stage between 4 and 5, less so between the stages of 1, 2, and 3 in the early stages of the negotiation process, right? If it's short term, there's really no need for too much concession sometimes because there's really about the value of the substance that come into the most of the conversations. Okay? So these are things to think about. This model is really helpful. You're processing a lot of content and information. This image usually becomes a useful point for a lot of people when they start thinking about negotiation again and say, what did I learn? I learned that negotiation really is about relationship first. Then I can start establishing what are the criterias and expectations that I want to be part of my negotiation process before I jump right in to talk about the car, before I jump in right talking about the home or anything that you're trying to sell, what it is that you're negotiating in that particular context. One, it comes across more authentic between you and the counterparts if you start off with the relationship because it's emphasizing the importance of listening and valuing your counterpart's needs and interests, right? So it's beyond just getting what you want out of it. That means the substance. So scale it back down, think about the relationship, who you're negotiating with, and what kind of relationship do you want to engage with in order to reach that substance that you want, or expand the pie or claim the pie, depending on what type of negotiation you're going to be in. So maybe that image was not enough for you. And you're one of those people. I have some students in my classroom, they're very methodological thinkers. They like to think about how they're going to engage in negotiation in various steps. So this process I like to share is a little bit more meaningful and useful for those who tend to think like this, right? In terms of steps. So if I want to engage in negotiation, I may want to decide, do I really want to negotiate? Is it necessary for me to negotiate? So you first, before you make any negotiation or starts to negotiate, you may want to first identify what is it that you're negotiating, right? And that's what we call the substance. Are you negotiating the car, the house, negotiating a trip, negotiating where to eat, negotiating who gets to sit up front of the car? So there's many things, right? We go from work to personal life. You must also identify what are the issues or the problems or the conflict within negotiation. Sometimes the substance in negotiation is not an object, it's not a car, it's not a home, it's not a contract, but it's negotiation for something that we care about. Negotiation about social issues that are happening within the organism in our society. That could be as simple as negotiating for pro-choice, negotiating for social justice, right? Negotiating for any aspects that cannot be something we can grab. That's when we say, what are the problems, what are the issues, and what are the conflicts from both sides of the parties? Then you can decide, is it negotiable? And if it's a yes, then you can determine at that point, I want to negotiate, right? But before you jump into a negotiation and start preparing for negotiation, one thing I want you to remember is that your negotiation efficacy and mindset is going to help you, or in essence, could also set you back in how you're going to prepare for negotiation. How confident you go into negotiation is going to determine what information you're going to seek during your negotiation preparation. How you view negotiation, whether it's affective, that means the positive component, or the negative component, right? The affect, a positive affect, a negative affect, could also determine how you go into negotiation. So I like to say, check your negotiation mindset. Are you ready to negotiate? Are you at a place that you feel like is a positive experience? Do you feel confident that you're going to get what you want out of the negotiation? When you shift your mind and you shift how you think about whether you're going to be successful in negotiation, you start to prepare for negotiation very much differently than if you feel like you're not as confident and going to be successful. So once you get to the next stage of preparation, you now not only identify and define it, but you really understand the problem. You really are taking the moment to say, I'm putting myself in this other person's shoes. That means your counterpart. Really taking a moment to see why they could view this particular conflict the way that they do. That's the empathetic component coming into play here. Empathy is not something that many of us are great at. We strive and would like to be empathetic, but it's really hard sometimes when we're in a conflict. When we're in a conflict, for some reason, we forget about empathy. We forget about what the other party is feeling or their perspectives, and we totally put all that energy on ourselves and how we tend to view things. And anybody that views things differently from us has to be on the total opposite and wrong side from us. Right? So take a moment and truly try to understand the issues and problems. If you think about it from the visual image, that's the relationship aspect that's happening right here. Okay. You want to also define what are your goals and expectations as well. What are the goals and expectations of your counterparts? That means what are their interests and their needs? You're still very much at the relationship aspect of the negotiation process. Okay. If you're engaging in some type of distributive, you want to identify maybe what is your BATNA. Make sure that your BATNA is strong. Make sure your BATNA is something that you're going to be satisfied with if you cannot reach an agreement. Many of you identify some BATNAs that you would not be satisfied with at the end, right? A BATNA is your best alternative. That means that you're going to be happy even if you do not reach agreement, and that you'll be okay with just this other alternative. You have to do a good selection of your BATNA, right? The other aspect is understanding your roles. If there's positions and titles, understand people's agenda, which is, what hat am I wearing? The hat am I wearing because I'm a human resource manager? Is this hat I'm wearing because I'm a buyer, right? The hat and the roles that you choose really matters. And the more you understand people's roles, you can understand their power, their status, and what are these assumptions that they have or what they're supposed to engage in because of their roles. I've engaged in activities where I've asked students to participate in particular roles. So what I do is I sign them in roles, and it doesn't have to do with negotiation. These are very much simple psychological patterns and behaviors that we engage in, which is quite normal. But once I assign them roles and they get attached to those roles, they start behaving what they think those roles are, what that really means to be in that role. So if I assign you that you're an aggressive person, they start engaging in aggressive patterns, even though they're normally not an aggressive person. Labels such as titles, position titles, really do impact how we behave and how we think. So understand your counterpart roles and how maybe their roles drive how they negotiate and what are the interests and needs that they may have. Okay. And then lastly, before you go into the process stage of the negotiation, you need to determine, are you going in this as an integrative or distributive type of bargaining? Are you planning to expand the pie or claim the pie? It's very important because it's going to determine the process or how you're going to negotiate in the next step, right? So here you are, you've made all the necessary preparation, you gathered data, you understand each other, you've took the time to really put yourself in your counterpart's shoes. Usually what happened here, if it's a long-term relationship, you want to make sure that you're building an authentic relationship, that you're listening with true intentions, that you're actually listening because you're caring and not listening just so that they can speak and for you to reply, right? So be careful, because a lot of times during negotiation, we're ready to come back with a defense. But take the time to say, I'm going to listen with care, right? Rather than listen and being ready to reply, right? So take the time to communicate clearly, express your interest clearly, be firm with your interests as well. Some of you mentioned in your discussions that sometimes you give up too much, right? If you look at the scores or the values of selling cars or buying homes, some of you on the far left side where you undersold, and then you see those who were sellers who were able to sell at a higher price, and you're like, well, how did they do that? Same context, same house, same everything. How is it that I sold something so much at a lower price than others? Or how is it that I bought something at so much higher price than others who were buyers? You know, just depending on what role you are. It really boils down to how well did you communicate your interests and how firm were those interests being expressed to your counterparts, right? The other one is checking your assumptions. Be careful what you think the other party wants. Be careful what you think is going on. Ask questions, use the inquiry method. Spend less time talking all about you, but spend time knowing what the other person is thinking. Reason why checking assumptions and communicating and using the inquiry method really works is because it allows you to possibly identify where's the zone of possible agreement, your ZOPA. You know, where could possibly be where their aspiration values are set, as well as their reservation values. Those is why conversation is so critical, because no one is going to tell you directly unless they fully trust you at that point to say, hey, here's where my marker is. I cannot go any higher than this. Or most importantly, a lot of people will not tell you where their reservation value is, because that's what they don't want to share. They may tell you where they're capped off of, but they won't tell you maybe where the reservations are. So be careful when you start communicating, that you're not just talking about yourself, but really engage in that inquiry method, right? So let's go to the execute, where now I'm going to talk about the substance. That's where, for the image part, execute is in the substance. Let's talk about what is it that we really want out of this. Is it the house? Is it the car, right? And then also you want to recognize how much time was involved. In essence, if I'm engaging with Felicia and we spent about an hour now talking, I want to recognize Felicia for all this time. Thanks for listening to what I really want. You know, I appreciate that you're able to listen and understand what are important to me. Okay. And if Freddie gave up some concessions, I want to say, Freddie, I really appreciate also that you're willing to give this bird as part of the process or the agreement. I think that's letting me know that you, one, want to close this deal, and reach an agreement is something that both of us want. And I really appreciate that. Just simple recognition goes a long way. It makes people feel even more satisfied with the negotiation process. Remember, it's not always about the value of the substance at the end. It's about how we feel during the negotiation and after the negotiation that really determines whether we choose to negotiate again with that person. Even if we look at the scores and go, wow, someone sold higher or lower than me, depending if you're a seller or buyer. If you felt like the process was fair and you felt satisfied with the interactions you had with your counterparts, you will still leave satisfied overall and more likely to engage in another negotiation with that particular person, right? So again, in real life, it's very rare that we get to see others engaging in the same context and see how well they fared compared to you. It's really about how I felt. Was it fair? Was it ethical? And how satisfied I was with the process that really creates these long-term negotiations. How much time did we spend talking about our agreements, our terms, and reconfirming those things, and also talking about it over and over before we just leave the negotiation or end the negotiation without reaching an agreement, okay? So what I want you to do next is we're going to do a poll, right? And here are 8 items. And what I want you to tell me is how many of these 8 items and tactics of these items are, do you feel most confident to use in negotiation? You're not going to actually select the items on the poll. What I want you to do is read all the items that's showing up on the screen and count how many of these items you feel most confident. And remember the number, right? So I want you to identify how many of these items you feel most confident in engaging or using in negotiation, right? So if I'm looking at this and I go exchange concessions, I feel confident I can do that. So that's 1 item. Establish high level rapport with the other negotiator. That's 2 items, right? Convince the other negotiator to agree with me. That's 3 items. All the other one, I'm not that confident about. So I can say out of 8 options, I'm confident with 3 of them, right? So there's only 8 options. If you get a count or a number higher than 8, then I'm maybe assuming you count something more than once, right? So taking a moment, count how many of these that you feel most confident, and a poll is going to pop up in a second for you to identify your number. So support, if you could, just pop the first poll, and then I want you to select which of these numbers that you, or the number of times you counted these tactics that you feel most confident in, right? Maybe the poll will pop up. Support? Can we get the first poll up? There we go. Thank you very much. For all the others who have put it in the chat box, I appreciate it. But do take a moment and go ahead and make your poll selection as well, that now is up on the screen. Okay. So did you select 1 item, 2 item, and so on, all the way up to 8 items? So thank you, Katrina, everybody who put in the chat box. There's some high numbers being selected. Impressive, right? All right, so let's see what the results are on the polls. How many did we select? And what was the highest number, all right? So 12 of you selected 5 out of this 8, which is awesome. And then a few of you said 3 items, and then a few of you also said 7 or 8, right? So 5 is actually an average. 4 and 5 is pretty common, an average number in terms of the number of times, the number of tactics that people feel most confident in. If you didn't see the poll, that's fine. No worries. Some of you are able to see it, some of you are not. If you are on an iPad or a phone, you're probably not going to see the poll. It only usually shows up on your computer if you're on a desktop. So no worries, Rishma and Diego. I've got your selections, right? So what does that mean? That you've now gained about 5 tactics, 6 tactics. I feel really confident. I got all the tools. I'm ready to go. I'm kicked off, to use my negotiation skills. I feel confident, right? Especially for those that picked 5 and up. But for those who picked lower, and even those who picked higher, right? The confidence comes from somewhere, okay? And I want us to really think about how our early experience and values play a role in how we choose to apply our negotiation training. I like to say that you can actually give people a toolbox. You can actually give people everything they need to do to build a house. But if they're not confident, or their past histories of their experiences were so dramatic and can also be so ingrained in as part of who we are, that it really can determine how we apply those frameworks and techniques. You and I can be trained the same way. We go through the same training content. We experience the same training activity. Why is it that Reshma apply these training techniques or the negotiation tactics so much better or so different than Diego, right? Or even let's say Neha. Neha apply it very different than when I think about when I negotiate with Gulum. Well, why is that? Some of what research has found is that our early experience and values still matter in our adult life, and it doesn't, unfortunately, leave us at the place of early where we like it to be, right? So the next poll, and for those who do not see the poll, that's absolutely fine. You can put your responses right into the chat box. You can switch it to just all panelists, so that way I'm the only one that can see it if you choose to keep your responses confidential with just me, that's absolutely fine. Okay, just make sure you change to all panelists. But if you want everybody else to see your selection, that's also fine as well. All right, so the next poll you're going to get is which relationship style most represent you? And what I mean by most is on average, you know, on average, this is the kind of relationship style that you engage in, right? Is it one, it is easy for me to become emotionally close to others? Is it two, I'm uncomfortable getting close to others? Three, I want to be completely emotionally intimate with others, but I often find that others are reluctant to get close to me as much as I would like. And the last one, I am comfortable without close emotional relationships. Now, you're probably thinking, well, it depends on the situation. I can do both. I can do one or the other. But what I want you to do is to tell me which one is most like you on average. All right, so Neha put in the response here. And for those who can take the poll, absolutely, you can use the poll. And if you can't, use the chat box. And Reshma, I got your response, same thing as Melina. All right, the majority of you selected the first option. Same thing as Lauren here. It's easy for me to become emotionally close to others. And then we have 32% of you at the bottom. I am comfortable without close emotional relationships. But more than half of you chose the very first option. And you're probably thinking, well, what does that really mean in negotiation? There's literature in social psychology, cognitive psychology, and child development. And what they call this is attachment theory that was originally developed by Bartholomew and Mary Ainsworth in the early 1990s and late 1980s. And what attachment theory is basically is that our early experiences with our caregivers, whether that is our mother, our father, and some of you were taken care of by your grandparents, and others that could be your older siblings, can become persistent in our lives and have these internal working models that affect how we think and how we feel and how we see the world. And that's what we call our schemas. It impacts our cognitive and our affective schemas, and also creates a representation of how we engage in close relationships with others. And that means our friends, our family, even negotiation partners, who we choose to interact with. It influences not only how we think and behave, but it also how we expect others to treat us and respond to us as well. It impacts our emotions. It creates a defense mechanism, or how we engage in defense mechanisms, and how we define or see relationships as adults. So our experiences early on in our childhood does influence how we view relationships as an adult. So you think about yourself, the 53% of you that selected the very first option, your attachment style is what we call secure in the literature, right? And these are the individuals that feel quite comfortable with relationships. They're very social, they want close relationships, they desire close relationships, they spend time building those relationships. For those few that selected fearful and insecure, or even preoccupied, the first, the second, and third options, these are individuals that just feel as though they know that relationships are important. They think that relationships is something they need to work on, but they just don't know how to really go about it. They have difficulties understanding the elements of building relationships, even if they want it, okay? And that's what fearful and insecure, right? And preoccupied is. But for fearful and insecure, there's also this higher self-defense that happens more so than preoccupied. Preoccupied individuals desire these types of relationships, and they're lower in self-defense mechanism. They're very much more open to it, but they just have difficulties of maintaining those types of intimate or long-term relationships. And then we have some of you that selected, the 32% of you said that you were dismissive types of attachment styles, that I don't really need anybody. I'm okay with myself. I mean, it's fine that there's a relationship, but I'm okay with just being by myself, right? And relationship is not the most important thing for me, right? So Regina said that I guess the difficulty in my situation is when I do not have the same nice and close relationship that I am seeking. this puts me in a defense with other person. Absolutely. And that's normal for a lot of individuals who are in the fearful and preoccupied attachment styles, because it becomes to a point that it's natural for you to defend yourself. Okay. Sumitra said, can you explain the preoccupied category? Absolutely. As I mentioned earlier, the preoccupied are individuals that really want to build those connections with people, but they have difficulties of knowing how to actually do that. That means the actual behaviors that can come across authentic to their counterparts or people they're interacting with. Some of these preoccupied, you can say that they're very low on their social skills. They can also be very much introvert that desire relationships, but they don't really know how to maintain those types of relationships. I'll break these down a little bit more in this chart, and it'll come a little bit more clear to you. So how attachment styles really work is that there's a view of yourself and a view of others, okay? And the model of self here is on the horizontal and the x-axis here. I mean the y-axis, right? The model of self is that how much dependency or anxiety do you have, okay? If it's a negative view, that means that you have higher anxiety, right? If it's a positive view of yourself, you tend to have low anxiety. That's what that means, okay? In terms of the parentheses of low and high. You have, if you're a negative view of self, you tend to have more anxiety, right? On the other side of the chart over here, on the left side, the model of others. Are you more likely to seek others? Do you try to avoid others? How social are you, if that makes it a little bit more clear and what we mean by avoidant or non-avoidant in terms of how we view others. If it's a positive view of others, then you tend to have a low avoidance. That means you don't really try to avoid people necessarily. You thrive on relationships. You thrive on being social settings. But if you're negative, if you have a negative view of others, then you're going to be high on avoidance, okay? So with that being said, I'm sure you're pretty confident where the secure people fall. They're right here in the left quadrant, the top first side, right? The top left quadrant. These people are the individuals that feel like their worth is a lot, that who I am should be respected, others should respect me. Not only am I demanding respect and my values and interests matter, but I also value your interests, right? And I'm taking the time to build a strong relationship with us. Right? These are the individuals that feel like relationships are important. They value it. They spend time with it. Building connections is important to them. Right? Then those who are on the preoccupied, the question that was just asked earlier, Sumitra said, what does it mean by preoccupied? These individuals tend to view actually others more positive. Remember I said that these individuals want and desire strong connections with others, but they just don't know how to do it, because what's really hindering their ability to build these positive connections with others is because their self-view is so negative. And it's so negative that they tend to have difficulties identifying who they are, and they spend more time striving for acceptance by others. That means I want you to like me. I want you to feel like I'm part of your group. And I spend less time spend less time trying to tell you who I am. Right? Those are the preoccupied individuals. Diego said, oh, you had selected the wrong category initially. That's absolutely fine. Okay. This is probably what you're thinking here, the dismissing or dismissive attachment theories. These are the individuals that tend to, like I said, I'm comfortable, right? Being by myself. And the reason why is that I'm not actually that social. So I tend to view other people negative, and I'm very avoidant of people. I don't really need to you to trust me. But one, I hold myself in high regards. And to some extent, they hold themselves so much in high regards that they don't really trust other people that much, and they rather want people to earn their trust. So remember we talked about there's two types of people who trust. Those who I trust easily, and then you break my trust, then I no longer trust you. That's the secure and preoccupied people. Versus the dismissing people are, my worth is very high, so you have to earn my trust. Okay? And because what they found in the past and their experience is that people tend to disappoint them. That means their trusts are often broke very early on. So they're very cautious about who they want in their lives, very cautious about who they interact with, even though they may highly hold themselves in high regards. right? And the last one is fearful and insecure. This is, if you found yourself here, this is where you really have a lot to work to do, because your negative view of others, as well as negative view of yourself, right? Your self-worth is low. You don't really trust people that much. Relationships is something that you really struggle with and as a challenge. Remember why this is so important, because if you remember the chart I show you, the 3 dimensions, the foundation of negotiation is about relationships. So you need to understand, where do you fall in this type of attachment theories, and where could possibly your counterpart fall as well? And how does this unfold in the negotiation process, right? One of the things we know about attachment styles and why it matters in negotiation is that if you're more in the fearful, insecure, or preoccupied, going into negotiation is so stressful for you. You're going to be in high anxiety. You're going to view the negotiation as a threatening situation, and you're most likely not going to get those resources or the substance that you want, or ability to really claim the pie or even expand the pie. Okay, so you want to start working on becoming more positive of others and also positive yourself. But there's actually some limitations to the secure relationship styles, and I'll talk about that next, okay? Um, and what happened is, in the secure relationship style, even though it sounds great that I'm willing to trust others easily, I really value relationships, those who are in the secure relationships can also give up too much if you are engaging with someone who is dismissive. So imagine I'm a secure attachment style and I'm engaging in a negotiation with someone who is dismissive. My negotiation propensity, which is my desire to negotiate as a secure attachment style, is going to be high. I'm excited. I view negotiation as positive. So I'm going to have a positive affect toward negotiation. I'm very confident about who I am in negotiation. But if I'm engaging in a dismissive type of attachment style negotiator, these individuals are going to engage in negotiation entitlement. And that negotiation entitlement is that I'm only concerned about my needs and my interests, and not so much about your needs. So I'm going to speak a lot about what I want out of it. These are the more assertive and aggressive types of negotiators. These are the ones that also give you the stonewall types of negotiation tactics, right? So these individuals can dominate a secure type of person, because the secure person is spending time really wanting to have a positive relationship, that they'll give up too much of their concessions early on, right? Versus like the preoccupied. The preoccupied are going to give a lot of concessions, and maybe on the lower end, if they're selling, if they're the buyer, they're probably going to be buying something overpriced, right? In the preoccupied attachment, because they're spending more time pleasing their counterparts. Preoccupied and fearful attachment styles are going to be the one we call the early negotiation exit. That means that I don't really want to negotiate. I don't want to spend a lot of time negotiating. I just wanted this negotiation to be over. They accept the first offer. There's really no room for conversation. And usually what happens is that they either do not get the best value. If they are going to engage in some kind of offer, preoccupied and fearful are going to present a very weak or low type of first offers, and more likely to accept low offers as well. Okay, so be careful, not just who you are, but also understand who you're engaging in. Be conscious of this and understand what are some of the challenges that each of these attachment styles have, and what are the advantages of them as well. If I'm engaging in someone that's very fearful, obviously for me, if a relationship is important, a long-term negotiation, I'm going to spend time making sure that my counterpart trusts me. You know, we're going to go back to that trust factor. In what ways am I going to increase my credibility? What ways am I going to increase my reliability? And what ways am I going to increase my intimacy? Sharing information about who I am as a person, giving up information that could be viable to them and useful to them as they prepare for the negotiation, is going to really help those who are in fearful. Okay. So you may not know exactly, no one's going to walk around and say, as we're doing this poll, hey, I'm a dismissive style, you know, Sumitra, I am a preoccupied style, you know, no one really goes around saying that, but you have to pick up social cues. And those are the conversations that you have with people to understand who they are, right? So let's get to the next agenda. We're almost there. And this is one of my favorite parts, is I want you to tell me in the chat box, I want you to name a person who you think is the best negotiator in history. and provide one reason for why you choose this person, right? Gulam said, I see myself moving styles depending on different situations. Absolutely. You're not really just one particular attachment style. You can shift depending on context. So we call those contextual types of attachment styles. But there is one attachment style that we tend to go to on average most often, which is basically our core attachment style. That we tend to engage in most relationships, regardless if we have highs and lows and other ones as well. There is actually an attachment style assessment. It's not as simple as picking one, as I made you guys do here in the poll. I've done a lot of research on attachment styles, and there's several items you can ask, and it does allow you to see the range of where you fall in each of the attachment styles, all right? So for this next exercise, I want you to tell me in the chat box, Arinza, there's no poll for this one, it's just a chat. You can put your answers right into the chat box. You know, who is that one person that you think of as a great negotiator? And, you know, Diego said Winston Churchill. You must have seen that movie, Diego. I really did like that movie. It shows that he's a great negotiator, absolutely. And he said because he's an influencer, he's clear when he talks and he's good with communication. We have Ben here. Ben said Angela Merkel puts ego aside and follows an evidence-based approach to using stats. Christiana said Steve Jobs. And then Melina said John Maxwell. I must say he had built relationship with others going back. We have Gal here said my son. We want to know what makes your son such a great negotiator. Jean said Ronald Reagan. He understand what he wanted, right? Sumitra said our current prime minister. Noel said John Kennedy. Oh, John Kennedy, okay. And then we have Boffin and Joseph who sneak peeked into my slide deck, all right? And hit it right on the nail. Our case study for today is Nelson Mandela. But before we get to Nelson Mandela, as Rashma and Joseph and Boffin guessed it, for our case study today, I want to share a quote real quick with you. We have some other submissions coming in. Noel said he chose JFK due to the missile crisis solutions. Absolutely. How you respond to crisis, how prompt you are, how caring you are, how empathetic you are. Arinza said Ruth Ginsburg, Mahatma Gandhi. I guess I can see that, Mahatma Gandhi. Jorge, Theodore Roosevelt. Obviously, there's so many great negotiators that exist, right? And do not feel like your response is not accurate at all. Absolutely, many great negotiators in our history. But before we share the case study on Nelson Mandela, I want to share a quote with you from Abraham Lincoln, who has also been identified as an all-time great negotiator as well. And Abraham Lincoln, if you're not aware, he was one of the former president of the United States of America. But before he was actually president of the United States, he was also an entrepreneur and he also was a lawyer. As you can tell, lawyers negotiate a lot. But he was also very business savvy. And what he meant by business savvy and his ability to be a great entrepreneur, a businessman, was his perception of how he viewed relationships when he interacted with people. So in this quote, he said, "It is an old and true maxim that a drop of honey catches more flies than a gallon of gall." So with women or men, if you would win a woman or man to your cause, first convince them that you are their sincere friend. Therein is a drop of honey that catches their heart, which say that they will is the great high road to their reason, in which when once gained, you will find by little trouble in convincing their judgment the justice of your cause. If needed, that cause really be a just one. So his ability to influence others is not just because he's a great communicator per se, but his ability to really value relationships and the authenticity of it creates trust. And when there's trust, it's easier to convince people to get what you need out of them, or what is it that you need in general, right? So Daniel said, Yasser Arafat negotiate Middle East peace deal. Absolutely. You know, I'm gonna have to think about other negotiating case studies I want to do. But the reason why I chose the late Nelson Mandela as the greatest negotiator in history is not because I've selected him alone. Is actually that Harvard Business Negotiator actually also selected him as one of the greatest negotiation in history. And the thing the name they put to him is that he was the man who changed the mindsets of people that makes him the great negotiator. Is beyond just getting of substance, but is really about influencing others to change who they are, is what they identify as a great negotiator. So if you're not familiar with Nelson Mandela history, and obviously Joseph and Rashma and Bafna do know the history, is why they selected him. But he was the leader of the governing national party of the African National Congress, the ANC, if you want to use that acronym. Okay, and a little bit about what happened and what led to it. Most of his negotiation actually occurred when he was in prison, and he was in prison for 27 years by his opponent party, right, in South Africa. And his opponent party was the nationalist government that was then led by President de Klerk. Okay? The goal was, at that time, he was interested in dismantling the apartheid in South Africa. There was a lot of unfair practices in terms of social justice, or lack of social justice, that was happening with certain communities or group members within South Africa. Right. And it led to a lot of political violence in the country. And a lot of that violence led to deaths as well. Okay. So give you an idea, when the real negotiation for this happened, even though he was in jail for 27 years, it happened mostly in the 1990s and all the way to 1993, when they finally reached an agreement. But the substance of the negotiation that they were going through between the two parties was having the first non-racial election. And through this, they actually won the actual party, and it was the first African National Congress that led this presidential campaign. All right, and actually won. So if you're thinking like, what made it so successful? What did Nelson Mandela do that made him the greatest negotiator in history? And if we take a look at his fingerprint, or his negotiation tactics, one of the things that he does really well is that he separates people from the problem. You know, I mentioned that he was in prison for 27 years. If I was in prison for 27 years, my opponent is going to be severely hated by me, right? That's like natural tendency for people. We start to hate our opponent for what they're doing to us and how they're making us feel. But one of the things he did really well is that he didn't actually start to hate President de Klerk. He took time, right, to put what's going on, and it didn't really hate President Klerk, but really talked about what was the issue at hand, the conflict that was happening within South Africa, the bigger picture, the bigger vision that he had, that he wanted the outcome to be. It's the serving of the greater good. It wasn't serving my interests or his interests or President de Klerk's interests. It's about serving others' needs. So he was able to put aside their differences and talk about the main conflict, the differences they had between each other that led to this conflict. So the second point is very much like this first one, is they focus on the interests and not the positions. It's good to know the positions, but do not become the focal point of the conversations. It's good to know the roles, so that way you know how to communicate with each other, but it should not be the only thing that can lead to an agreement. You have to understand each other. And that means Mandela actually took time to advocate for his primary interests. He talked about unitary, he talked about unity, he talked about the greater good of the people, that it's not just about him. Again, lesser interest about him and more focus on the greater people. Going back to thinking about how we influence people, that's very much what negotiation is all about. How well can we influence other people to see our interests? One, we need to make sure our vision is clear and our goal or what we want is also clear. And that comes down to how well we communicate. The third element that he did really well is forgiveness. Be kind, cultivate the relationship. Going back to the first dimension, that you should not have animosity toward each other, because remember, it's not just about attacking somebody, but it's about resolving a problem and be able to be forgiving. And the same thing as when we engage in tit for tat. Remember, when you're playing win as much as you can. Be forgiving when they start to give concessions. Be forgiving when they take time to hear your interests and your side, right? And the last is subjective value. Take the moment to hear each other's point of view and interests, right? I think one of the things that Mandela did really well with President de Klerk is that he built a long-term relationship with him over the years. While he was in prison, he communicated with him frequently, and he wasn't necessarily attacking him throughout the process. So I want to share to you a quote by Nelson Mandela, and I want you to tell me what was his BATNA during this process? We know what the end game was, the outcome, the substance. But if you're reading this quote, tell me what you think his BATNA is in the chat box. So during my lifetime, I have dedicated myself to the struggle of the African people. I have fought against white domination, and I have fought against Black domination. I have cherished the ideal of a democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if needs be, it is an ideal for which I am prepared to die. So based off of just this quote, in the chat box, what do you think his BATNA was? Ramiro said use of violence to fight for equal rights. Okay. What are other comments or thoughts? Jean said death. Joseph said death. Become a martyr. Samitra said death. Daniel said death in person. Yep. Absolutely. For those on the last submissions, Noel said the status quo. His BATNA was death. And if you think about that, he's equally happy and satisfied with that. He said, I am prepared to die. And if it's for a cause that he believes in, that's his BATNA, absolutely. That this is something so worthy to him that he's willing to go to this extreme. He's willing to give up in regards to his life. Okay? So I want to share with you a quote by Susan Hackley, who wrote the article on Nelson Mandela from Harvard's program of negotiation. Right? And she said he rejected the simple-minded notion that one must either negotiate with the devil or forcibly resist. He did both. He was willing to make concessions, but not about what was most important to him. With respect to his key political principle, he was unmovable. You're probably wondering what concessions that were given during the negotiation process. President de Klerk said, look, I'm willing to free you from prison if you just stop advocating for these types of things. I want the violence to end. I'll release you if you can make that happen. And he said, no, I don't want you to release me. Keep me in jail until we can reach the agreement that he wants, what is his end goal regarding the election for South Africa and his people and the treatment of his people, right? So I think because of that, he was not willing to just negotiate for anything. It must be what it is, his goal that he wanted, his interest, his initial intentions of why he's going through this. President de Klerk remembered Nelson Mandela, and he said, although we were political opponents, and although our relationships were often stormy, we were always able to come together at critical moments to resolve the many crises that arose during negotiation. So as you can see here, that even if we have different views and perspectives, and they can be very, very different from each other in terms of extremity, there's still a level of respect because the relationship foundation was built, right? So this is just a particular example of many other case studies. You guys are able to provide me with dozens of them. If you're interested to see how each of those types negotiate really well, do your own case study as well, and really start to examine what are their behaviors, what are their mindset, and how they negotiated for that particular substance or outcome. And you start to learn more about, what resonates with you in your negotiation. And as we're talking about what you can do next in terms of this course, as we're wrapping up, I like to just share with you, go ahead and start thinking about developing your own personal action plan. And what that means is identifying where are you at exactly. So going back to that poll where you check the checkbox, some of you identified 5. That means there are 3 more that you need to work on. For those who selected 3, there's 5 more you need to work on, right? But you don't have to work on all of them at once. You can start off with picking your next one that you want to work on of that skill set of negotiation. Which one do you really want to work on first? And then as you check off one, you do another one. So in this personal action plan, maybe your greatest current skill, you want to highlight what you're good at because that increases self-efficacy, creates a positive affect, increases your negotiation propensity. My current skills is that I'm really good at being prepared for negotiation. I do a lot of research. I collect data. I use data. I spend time understanding who I'm going to negotiate with, doing some background check on them. But the area that I really need to work on, just giving an example here, is many of the comments I see participants put in the discussion box is how to be more assertive, right? Without coming across as aggressive, as coming off as manipulative or coercive. right? How do I be assertive to get the values and needs I want in negotiation where I'm not the one who's buying things at a high price, or I'm not the one that's selling things at a low price, right? So you want to also establish how are you going to work on these skills, and that's goals. You want to make sure that you clearly identify how you're going to do this. So here I put an example. I'm going to practice expressing what is important to me. I want to be vocal, speak about it. Doesn't have to be in a negotiation setting. I can be just talking with my friends if something happened. I want to be able to start practicing in a respectful way, to share what is important to me and what I want with my friends, my family, or any others. So it becomes more normalized for me and become more comfortable for me. So I think about, like, sometimes people ask me where I want to eat, and then I go, I don't know, I don't care. And then they make a selection. I really don't want to go there, but I don't really want to speak up because I don't want to cause conflict. I don't want to cause much of a trouble. So I go eat there anyways, and I don't like the food. But a very simple example, you start to speak up a little bit more, right? So these are things you want to think about how to practice. And as you develop your action plan, be very concrete. Philippia, thank you for the session, attending the session, right? We're almost in, we're at the last slide. And then develop an action plan using SMART goals. Is it specific? Is it manageable? Is it achievable? And is it realistic and time bound? So I'll give you an example here. I speak up more. I'm not afraid to pause and be silent, being comfortable with silent. And I'm going to do this over the next 6 months in this particular period. So do that action plan for yourself. Think about it, write it down, and then share it with others. When you share with others, it creates accountability, and also allow others to check on you and say, how's it going? How's that action plan that you develop? It creates commitment and motivation. So pick someone in the course, pick a family member, pick your spouse or your partner, and share with them what are your goals so that you can create commitment and create accountability in order for you to improve your negotiation skills. Now, maybe that action plan is not something you're interested in doing. You're much more on the reading side of things. You want more resources. Absolutely fine. I went ahead and provided a list of books and resources that you can use. I have some of them right here behind me that I read. I have plenty of books in my office. I read all of them. Sometimes I read them a couple of times because I forget. I read them and then I read more things. You get cognitive overload. These are great books to have in your collection. If you think about it, the left side specifically is related to negotiation, and the right side are just what we call things that are important part of the process of negotiation, but it necessarily doesn't say we're negotiating, right? So how to build trustees, how to really start to build authentic relationships, and these are things, additional resources that you can read about, right? So the last thing I want to share with you is what's expected of this class as there's a cap. As you finish off is completing a final assignment 8.1 in module 8. Is do make sure, what I see very often for this particular assignment is that people tend to submit their responses by describing what is a BATNA, defining what is aspiration value. The assignment is not about actually providing the definitions or the description of negotiation. What I'm asking you to do actually is to pick a context, a situation, a real life personal situation, and apply these questions to that situation. So make sure you watch that 1-minute video by Professor Karen about what he talks about, why is it so important for you to pick a personal negotiation experience and answering these questions according to that. And I'm going to evaluate your responses to those questions and also provide you feedback. So the more concrete, the more examples you provide and details you provide in your responses, the more I can give you feedback. And usually this is where most of my feedback comes in. A lot of participants really enjoy this final assignment because they wait for me to give them that feedback. So that is essentially our final webinar session. I appreciate those who are giving me the extra couple minutes that we went over. Rashima, thank you for staying as long as you can. The question is, will these slide decks be available? Absolutely. They're going to be on our Canvas under webinars. You can download the slide deck, but most importantly is about you. And I want to make sure that I spend just 10 seconds at least as we're kind of wrapping up to say thank you. You've done an amazing job, each of you. That means from your patience, your time, your effort. When I say patience, is patience, the IDG, and sticking through it, making sure you complete your activities on time, engaging in the peer discussion, submitting your reflection assignments. You did an amazing, fantastic job, and you should be very proud of how far you've come and all the things that you've practiced. And even if you are not at a 5 or 7 or 8 level of efficacy, you can get there. Just continue working on it. I believe in you, and I know for sure that you'll continue to work on it and develop those skills. So with that, I appreciate you very much. It was a privilege, and also something that I do not take lightly to be part of your process with you. And I hope that you found this course meaningful and relevant to your next part of your journey. So I wish you the best of luck and anything that you do in life. So thank you very much. And just some logistics about what's happening next on the Canvas. We have summary sheets that will be available after July 2nd. You'll start to see the feedback from me on assignment 8.1. And then as always, give us any feedback. Feedback is always appreciated. We want to make sure that we're improving and serving you guys better and supporting your needs and learning goals. So thank you, Audie. Thank you, Ramiro. Thank you, everyone, for today's session. It was very much appreciated. Melina, appreciate your participation as always during these webinars because it makes it so much more engaging than anything. So thank you. Take care, Joseph. Stay safe, Audie. And so glad that everybody was able to interact and stay in touch with each other as well. Thanks, Freddie. Golem said you're running on late assignments. No worries. I'll wait for you to submit them. Right? Visa as well. Take care for those who are having a good night. And for those who are starting the day like me in the East Coast, enjoy the rest of your day. For those who are having the holiday, enjoy your weekend that's coming, a 4-day weekend, right? Bye, everybody. Take care. Bye, Regina.